Kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa. Hello and welcome to our presentation. Our project is evaluating the effects of Wellington's Animal Bylaw and Snip'n'Chip campaign, and our sponsor is the Wellington City Council.
New Zealand has been geographically isolated until roughly 1,000 years ago, and in that time, hundreds of unique native species have evolved without threat of predation by mammals. So when Maori and European settlers first arrived, the mammals they brought decimated the native wildlife. In response, government and conservation agencies have introduced the Predator-Free New Zealand Plan, which aims to eradicate invasive rats, possums, and mustelids by the year 2050. Our project focuses on another mammal that is not included in the Predator-Free New Zealand Plan, but is nonetheless a predator of native species and also the most common companion animal in the country, the cat.
The Wellington City Council and SPCA have collaborated to promote responsible pet ownership and reduce the impact of cats on wildlife. In August of 2016, the Wellington City Council passed the Animal Bylaw, which mandates that cat owners microchip their cats and register those microchips with the New Zealand Companion Animal Register. The Animal Bylaw went into effect February 2018. To help cat owners comply with the Animal Bylaw, the Wellington City Council funded the SPCA's Snip'n'Chip campaign. Through the purchase of an online voucher redeemable at most Wellington vet practices, cat owners could receive a substantial discount for microchipping and desexing procedures. This brings us to the goals of our project. Our first goal is to evaluate the public awareness, perceptions, and compliance with the Animal Bylaw. Our second goal is to evaluate the effectiveness of the Wellington Snip'n'Chip campaign.
We defined 3 key objectives to help us meet our goals. Our first objective was to evaluate the Animal Bylaw, including the public's perception, compliance, and awareness of the bylaw. To do this, we administered in-person surveys to residents of Wellington. Our second objective was to evaluate the awareness and perceptions of the Snip'n'Chip campaign. To do this, we used parts of our public in-person surveys as well as an online survey that was emailed to people who use Snip'n'Chip. Our third objective was to evaluate the combined effect of the bylaw and Snip'n'Chip campaign on cat microchipping. To do this, we used microchip registration data from the New Zealand Companion Animal Register and looked at microchipping trends over 8 years. Going back to Objective 1, we surveyed 151 Wellington residents from 30 different suburbs, including 48 cat owners, and we found that the majority of cat owners were aware of what the Animal Bylaw entailed, with 63% of cat owners being aware, while only 32% of non-cat owners were aware. This was unsurprising since the bylaw only mandates what cat owners should do. We also found that most cat owners were already in compliance with the bylaw as well. 81% of cat owners we surveyed already had their cats microchipped and those microchips registered. Though we didn't encounter many people who were not compliant with the bylaw, some of the reasons people chose not to microchip their cats were because they had exclusively indoor cats, they felt microchips weren't necessary, they thought their cats were too old, or it was too expensive for them. Additionally, we found that 100% of cat owners surveyed had their cats desexed. Even though this is not required under the Animal Bylaw, this is encouraging to see that this is a relatively widespread practice.
In terms of perception of the bylaw, we found that 86% of all participants had positive feedback about it. This was an overwhelming majority, in contrast to the 11% of people who had negative feelings about the bylaw, and the 3% who had neutral feelings. Interestingly, approximately the same percentage of cat owners and non-cat owners felt positively about the bylaw, which was surprising to us since the bylaw only affects cat owners. Furthermore, we expected there to be more of a controversy surrounding the idea of microchipping cats, but according to our public response, this was clearly not the case, as a majority of people were in favor of the bylaw. We coded the main reasons for both positive and negative perceptions of the bylaw. For people who had a positive perception, the most common reason for their beliefs stemmed from this idea that microchipping was good for reuniting a cat with its owner. Reuniting lost cats was mentioned at least 3 times as frequently as any other reason, which suggests that people thought most often about the welfare of the cat in deciding how they felt. Additionally, the idea of holding the owners accountable for the cat's actions, such as if the cat was repeatedly being a nuisance to other animals or people, was the second highest reason for agreement with the bylaw. Finally, the third highest reason for agreement with the bylaw was because microchipping can help identify stray cats. For those who disagreed with the bylaw, the most common reasons for disagreement was because the bylaw is ineffective and that microchipping is considered unethical. Surprisingly, the third highest reason for having a negative perception of the bylaw was because it does not go far enough in helping to manage cats in New Zealand.
Though the majority of participants we surveyed in person tended to give us one-word responses, just answering our question and a little more, we also encountered some really fascinating, talkative people whose situations were rather unique. One person was a previous cat owner and who was adamant about never letting the Wellington City Council get their hands on any stray cat he found because he was positive they would destroy it. Not kill it, destroy it. Further, he was positive the entire council was biased against cats and wants to see them all eradicated. A young but incredibly passionate cat owner explained that he was so confident that his cats would return home that he felt there was no need to microchip. Though he has a highway right off of his driveway, he was certain the most inhumane thing to do would be to confine his cats to his house or even his yard. He went on to explain that though many of his cats had been hit by cars in the 15 years he had been living at his house, it was the natural order of things and preferable to any restriction on their roaming. Lastly, we talked with the cat owner who, during the first couple questions, appeared to be rather uninformed and indifferent about cat policy. Later on in the survey, it was revealed her son was a passionate environmentalist who researched and determined how the cat should be taken care of for her. Because of her son's research, they kept the cat indoors at all times and even had a birds be safe collar on it should the cat escape. Here we see a promising example of the younger generations educating older generations about responsible cat ownership and the environment.
For one of our in-person survey questions, we asked, on a scale of 1 to 5, where 1 is strongly disagree and 5 is strongly agree, how do you feel about the statement, local government should play a role in managing cats? We found that out of all our participants, 54% marked a score of either 4 or 5, meaning that they agreed that the local government should be involved, while 20% marked a score of 3 and were considered neutral about the topic, and 26% marked a score of 1 or 2 and were considered in disagreement. When receiving answers to this question, there were almost 2 sides to the story. We had people on one end of the spectrum who believed that the government should not be involved simply because it is completely the owner's responsibility to manage their own pet. However, on the other end, we had people who thought it was the government's job to manage irresponsible cat owners and therefore play a role in managing cats in Wellington.
One of our survey questions was a scale response about how strongly the participant feels that domestic cats are a threat to native wildlife. So we partitioned our survey data by cat owners who answered 4 or 5 for agree, and 1 or 2 for disagree, and looked at ways that these two groups attempted to mitigate their cat's impact on wildlife. We found that cat owners who agree that cats are a threat to wildlife are much more likely to keep their cats indoors than cat owners who don't believe this, but that both groups are approximately equally likely to collar their cats for the sake of wildlife protection. We also found that cat owners are more likely to keep their cats inside some or all of the time than to put collars on their cat, and this conclusion was supported by data from our focus group. We introduced a third category of cat owners, and this was cat owners who disagreed that cats are a threat to wildlife, specifically because owners could take action to mitigate their cat's threat. When we included this group in our analysis, we found that 50% of cat owners who said cats were a threat to wildlife, or that owners could mitigate that threat, actually did try to mitigate their cat's impact. There seems to be a disconnect between how cat owners think cats should be managed and how they're actually willing to manage their own cats.
To determine the awareness of the Snip'n'Chip campaign, we used our in-person survey data. We found that 30% of cat owners were aware of Snip'n'Chip and that 28% of non-cat owners were aware. Though this might initially suggest that the spread of advertising between cat owners and non-cat owners was the same, when we looked deeper, we found that the majority of non-cat owners had heard of Snip'n'Chip through indirect means, and that cat owners heard of Snip'n'Chip through direct means. This indicates that Snip'n'Chip was actually targeted at cat owners, or at least they were the ones who retained the advertising. The most common ways cat owners said they had heard of Snip'n'Chip was through social media, the newspaper, and the radio. From our findings, Snip'n'Chip was seemingly not as effectively advertised as it could have been because only 30% of cat owners were familiar with it. We do acknowledge that this is a year and a half after the campaign ran, however, and that the public awareness has likely decreased since then. To determine a component of the effectiveness of Snip'n'Chip, we used our email survey data. We found that 33% of people would not have microchipped without the Snip'n'Chip campaign and that 39% would not have desexed. Common reasons people cited for not being able to microchip or desex without Snip'n'Chip were not being able to afford it, or that getting the procedures done without the Snip'n'Chip was too inconvenient. From our findings, Snip'n'Chip was overwhelmingly effective in providing discounts and accessibility to people who would have otherwise been unable to microchip or desex.
As part of our online Snip'n'Chip survey, we asked about responsible pet ownership behaviors that the SPCA promoted during the Snip'n'Chip campaign. These included keeping cats indoors at night, both for the cat's safety and to prevent them from hunting wildlife, using collars that are brightly colored or have bells to alert wildlife when cats are near, feeding cats specifically before they leave the house, and giving cats extra attention and toys so they are less likely to leave the house and hunt. In our survey, we looked at which behaviors people were doing before they used Snip'n'Chip, and then which they started doing after Snip'n'Chip. Unfortunately, only 6% of cat owners actually changed their behavior after and possibly due to using Snip'n'Chip. This was discouraging until we looked at how many cat owners were already doing these recommendations. 96% of cat owners were already doing at least one of these behaviors, and even 10% were already doing all four. So from these findings, Snip'n'Chip was not necessarily effective in changing cat owner behavior, but many participants were already being reasonably responsible in the first place. Here we see that approximately half of Snip'n'Chip users were already keeping cats indoors at night. Almost a third put collars on their cats to protect wildlife. Most cat owners feed their cats specifically before it leaves the house, and 2/3 were providing toys and entertainment for their cat. Only 4% weren't doing any of these behaviors at all before Snip'n'Chip. So even though Snip'n'Chip didn't have a significant change in behavior, all of these users were relatively responsible in the first place.
In our online survey to Snip'n'Chip users, we asked them what improvements they believe could be made to the Snip'n'Chip program. The first area where users said there should be improvements was on flexibility with being able to make appointments. Many users found it difficult to access the service because they were too busy during the workday. Therefore, it was recommended that Snip'n'Chip provide after hours, even just a few times a month, for those who could not make it during the regular workday. Additionally, clearer eligibility requirements was a suggestion made by many users. Some users were not aware ahead of time that the campaign was only taking place in Wellington, or that their local vet clinics were not participating. This meant that they either 1. Could not use the vouchers they had accidentally purchased, or 2. Had to make special arrangements and travel to use them. Also, in order for a cat to participate in the Snip'n'Chip campaign, the cat has to be past a certain age and weight. The lack of communication about this accidentally caused people to purchase vouchers and realize soon after that their cat was not eligible. Finally, several participants recommended better and more widespread advertising of the Snip'n'Chip campaign, claiming that advertisement was sparse in certain locations, so it was difficult to get more information about the program. Another suggestion involved advertising additional deals through the Snip'n'Chip program, in addition to microchipping and desexing. For example, these deals could include discounted bells and collars.
Our third objective for this project was to observe the effects of the Animal Bylaw, Snip'n'Chip campaign, and community microchipping events on microchip registration trends. We obtained data from the New Zealand Companion Animal Register for this purpose. What you see here is a plot of Wellington cat microchips registered each month from January 2010 to January 2018. As you can see, this data is roughly cyclic until the big spikes on the right-hand side. The yellow spike represents the effect of the Snip'n'Chip campaign, and blue spikes indicate effects of community microchipping events. We were able to calculate trends in the cyclic data and quantify deviation from those trends. As shown here, the Snip'n'Chip campaign in yellow and community microchipping events in blue contributed many more microchips than usually are implanted during the time periods they ran. However, the interesting information here is the green deviation. These are time periods that had statistically significant microchipping increases without any community event that we know of. We believe these are evidence of a behavior change, permanent or temporary, caused by increased awareness of microchipping by the bylaw and by Snip'n'Chip.
Our first set of recommendations are in regards to how the WCC and SPCA can encourage responsible pet ownership. From an outreach perspective, we encountered many people in our survey and focus group who were aware that domestic cats are a threat to wildlife, but wish they had the numbers from the government to be able to back up this claim. Thus, we recommend that the WCC and SPCA have a more data-oriented approach to their advertising strategies and provide more of the numbers and research, such as how many birds are harmed by cats per year, in order to convince people that this is actually an issue that owners need to care about. We also asked our focus group participants about whether or not they would respond to studies done on this topic in other countries, but it turns out they would only trust studies and research done in New Zealand specifically. A great example of an advertisement that could be useful is one shown on the right, which combines a credible source in New Zealand with the necessary data and explains why certain cat owner behaviors are encouraged. Furthermore, we recommend advertising methods that promote responsible pet ownership from a cat welfare approach. This recommendation is based off of research done by Edie McDonald from the Department of Conservation. who found that a listening and emotional response from people is very effective. For example, we suggest using advertising such as the one on the right that shows the benefits of microchipping, because in this case a child is reuniting with his lost cat that could have otherwise been hurt or injured if it was not microchipped and found. Finally, we suggest that the WCC and SPCA utilize social media as the primary medium for advertisement, since it was found that a majority of our survey responses had heard about Snip'n'Chip through this. We also suggest that the WCC and SPCA utilize vet clinics to help promote responsible pet ownership behaviors, given the newfound relationships they have formed with these clinics through the Snip'n'Chip campaign.
We have also identified 4 key recommendations for the Snip'n'Chip campaign if it is to happen again. The first recommendation is that there needs to be a verification of eligibility when purchasing vouchers online. In our Snip'n'Chip surveys, we had many people who mentioned that they had bought a voucher but were unable to participate in the Snip'n'Chip campaign because they didn't live in Wellington or didn't live near a local vet clinic that was participating, or their kitten was not the right age or weight to be able to be desexed. So we recommend that on the page where people purchase these vouchers, there needs to be a verification of their eligibility, including their location and the kitten's age and weight. Our second recommendation is that Snip'n'Chip should be extended to include some after-work hours, even if this is only a couple times a month. The entire purpose of the Snip'n'Chip campaign is to help people microchip and desex their cats who otherwise wouldn't be able to. Since a lot of people work 9 to 5, and these are the same hours that vet clinics are typically open, many of these people likely can't microchip and desex their cats because of their schedule, and we believe that including some after-work hours would really help target these other people as well. Our third recommendation is that if the Snip'n'Chip campaign is to happen again and the organizations involved want to evaluate this campaign, they need to collect timely feedback from their users. Right now, we're evaluating this program, and it's been almost a year and a half since it took place, so the validity of our data is kind of questionable since it's unclear how well the participants actually remember the campaign. So if this is to happen again, that feedback needs to be collected soon after the campaign. Our final recommendation is that organizations involved with the Snip'n'Chip campaign need to predefine their expectations with each other. If the campaign is to happen again and they want to evaluate it, they need to predefine what data needs to be saved, what data needs to be collected, and what data should be shared amongst organizations so that this campaign may best be evaluated and so that that data is available.
From our work, we've been able to draw several conclusions. First, most people are in favor of the bylaw and the majority are compliant. And the primary reason people agree with the bylaw is a microchip's ability to reunite a lost cat with its owner. Second, Snip'n'Chip was successful in helping people who really needed it. We found that 26% of Snip'n'Chip users could not have afforded to microchip and/or desex their cats without the discount provided by the campaign. But while people who used the campaign benefited enormously, it seems that its advertising did not reach lower-income households as effectively as it could have. In our email survey, 28% of survey respondents reported earning $50,000 or less a year, but according to the 2013 census, 61% of Wellington residents earned $50,000 or less annually. This discrepancy could have 2 causes. The first would be that the campaign's advertising failed to reach this low-income demographic, but the second is that we have heavy response bias in the survey we sent, and we received disproportionately few answers from low-income households. Our final conclusion is that there has been a change in microchipping trends in the last year. Whether this is temporary or permanent, we cannot say, but we believe it is caused by increased publicity of microchipping due to the Animal Bylaw and Snip'n'Chip campaign. In addition to our conclusions, we also have some suggestions for future avenues of research. Our first question is, are low-income cat owners more likely to be non-compliant? We surveyed only a small number of cat owners who were not compliant with the bylaw, so we could not draw any conclusions from this small data set. Our second question is desexing cats as commonplace as our data suggests? According to our in-person survey, 100% of cat owners had desexed their cats, but according to our email survey, 39% of Snip'n'Chip users could not have afforded to neuter their cats without the program's aid. We recommend that future research further explore this issue. Our final question is, why is there such a significant disconnect between cat owners' beliefs and actions? As mentioned previously, 50% of cat owners who agreed cats were a threat to wildlife or said that they weren't a threat because owners could mitigate that impact, actually took action to reduce their cats' effect on wildlife. This suggests that even though owners can see the problems with other cats, they fail to connect these problems or the solutions to their cats. Future research should explore the reason for this disconnect. We would like to thank all the people who made our project possible. Michael Elms and Carolina Ruiz, our IQP advisors, Daniela Biagio, our sponsor liaison from the Wellington City Council, Kath Taylor, member of the WCC Research and Evaluation Team, Adele Hawkswell from the Wellington SPCA, Veterinary Practice Manager, Melanie Bayless, Marketing and Fundraising Coordinator at the Wellington SPCA, Heidi Olson, Head Veterinary Nurse at the Wellington SPCA, and Nigel Morris, Manager at New Zealand Companion Animal Register.